when we're highly sensitive, we inherit our sensitivity. It is part of our physiological body. It is not a choice. We are wired this way, and we are wired differently. And there's nothing wrong with us. But as we inherit our sensitivity, we also inherit the belief that we have to hide it. And when we hide it, there are consequences to that. Once we internalize that something is wrong with us, that's where the problem begins. When we grow up as highly sensitive people and we start suppressing how we feel, our emotions, and we start limiting how we allow ourselves to express ourselves, well, we become people pleasers, we become all kinds of different things. But it can also be that it affects our body. Because suppressing our true nature puts a lot of stress on the body. And stress in our body, the medical world tells us, it suppresses our immune system. And then we are more vulnerable to disease, to predispositions, and just our bodies start to break down. That's why there's a large amount of people who are highly sensitive who have chronic illness. And that's my experience. And I'm going to share that story. At 11 years old, when I think back, now that I'm older, and look at these young girls, I'm baffled. At 11 years old, I started bleeding when I went to the bathroom. Not because I was becoming a woman, but because there was blood in my stools. And it usually happened during the night with a lot of abdominal pain. And because I had already begun to feel shame for who I was, even though I was in a good family, I actually didn't tell anybody for 2 years. It wasn't happening every day, but enough that it was instilling a lot of fear and shame and insecurity. I've never told this story publicly. I didn't think it would do this. Okay. So at 13, I shared with my mom, and of course I had to go see a doctor. Because of the shame still that I had in me, I had to have a colonoscopy. And at 13, I drove myself to a clinic because I didn't want anybody with me. Again, that shame that started, now I know, from being a highly sensitive girl. And at the clinic, it was this big doctor, not to stereotype, but for me as a little girl, foreign, with slick back hair, big glasses, little clinic around the corner. And when it was time to do the exam, he told the nurse to leave. And he did it himself, left me naked on the table, and what happened wasn't right. So it increased the shame. A few days later, the family doctor, called my mom. And I heard that it was him. And because he asked to talk to my mom, and it was supposed to be just with my mother, I couldn't take this, because it was like, this is my life. So I went downstairs, picked up another receiver, and listened to the conversation. And the doctor told my mother that I had been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and back then, it was unseen in young people, and that I would just have to accept it, and that I would live with it for the rest of my life. I felt rage. I think for the first time in my life, I actually felt rage. Not only because I hadn't been allowed to listen to the conversation, I mean, it was me. And second, how could this doctor pretend to know what the rest of my life would be like? But I went back upstairs, looked at my mom, and pretended that I hadn't heard what I had heard. Because suppressing who I was already who I was. And this is part of the cost of when we suppress ourselves. The rest of the story goes that once I got my driver's license at 16, I started taking myself to different naturopaths because I believed in naturopathy and holistic medicine. I got on some regular medication that didn't work. I did all kinds of treatments, taking 80 supplements a day and only feeding myself with boiled lettuce and goat cheese. Anyway, and asking my father to pay for these things was never easy either, because there was always this sense of, Annie's sick again. So I could never just, I was just never accepted as having that. So years went by. Once I left home and lived on my own, I was sick a lot, but didn't tell my family either. And several times I drove myself to the ER on the verge of death and was greeted at the ER like, how did you drive yourself here? This is insane. So it was really hard. Then at some point I was hospitalized for a while. They couldn't get it under control, and I needed to accept a surgery that they wanted me to have, which was to remove my large intestine. And I had to accept, or I was going to die. So I did, and I had to come back a couple months later because they had to wean me down the painkillers so that the painkillers would work for the surgery. And in a weird twist of déjà vu, nobody was available to take me to my surgery, and I took a taxi to go to the surgery that I might die from. And it was a horrible experience. Hey, I just want to take a minute here. I need your help. There is something weird going on right now with small channels, small creators, and the algorithm. A lot of people are saying, what's happening with my views? And I can attest that it's happening for my channel too. So if you could subscribe, share the video, share the channel, invite people over, like, comment, watch another video, that would be super helpful and I would really appreciate it. If my videos are improving your life with entertainment or a little bit of light or making you do deep shifts because something I say resonates with you and you would like to support me in a more concrete way, I would invite you to go to Buy Me a Coffee. You can buy me a virtual coffee. And I'll just state some facts here. I don't want to mess up anything with the AI listening to me, but if you use the super thanks, I receive 25 to 30% of the value of what you send my way. And if you use the Buy Me a Coffee link, I receive 95%. So I'm just saying, I would really appreciate it because it's your gifts that allow me to continue to do what I do. Thanks. All this is to say that this suppression of people that are highly sensitive can really have really deep consequences. For some people, it is becoming people pleasers or disconnecting with who you really are, going through the world like feeling this thing trapped inside, and there are different ways that it can show up. And the reason that I have not shared this story publicly, and this is kind of why I want to share it, is that as I was just recently, just a few weeks ago, I was thinking, because I've had epiphanies for the past 5 years, something in me saying, Annie, you must share that story. A lot of women have chronic illness. You have to share this story. But something, even though I knew that it was inspirational because I'm still here, and something was still like terrifying me. And what I realized recently is that it wasn't that I was ashamed, like the little girl shame that I felt because of my disease. It was that I realized that I felt the shame of the adult of thinking what kind of, pardon me, fucked up person allows herself to suffer that much and not ask for help. And that was the shame that I was feeling. And what I realized a few weeks ago is that they were not conscious choices. They were the deepest, most insidious result of learned suppression. And that is something that we do. And the shame that many of us, not because of disease, but because of different parts of ourselves that we carry, because we are highly sensitive, because we suppressed all this, is something that we really have to alchemize and turn into something positive and free ourselves. So I did say, if we isolate ourselves because The world is harsh, it's loud, and it's just hard for us to deal with. And the problem is that we're wired for connection. And for highly sensitive people, highly sensitive women, it can be very painful, this isolation. Even if we're married or have family, there's a level of isolation that we feel. And it can be very painful because what I think many of us feel, like I said in my book, is that we feel that we're here for a reason, that there's a purpose to us and how we were created. And when we isolate ourselves, it's necessary, it's a response to something that we feel, but we also feel this unease and anxiety of knowing, but I'm missing something. I'm missing something about my life that I'm supposed to do. So, the negative picture, the hardship of the highly sensitive woman being said, what do we do with it? Why is it that we're here and that we were created this way? Well, when you think about it,